Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening to the PropsClear podcast. I'm your host, Jillian Angeline. We're talking all about drones and about improving public perception surrounding the unmanned aircraft industry. These episodes are for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, so none of this constitutes legal advice. Fasten your seatbelts and let's get started. Today's guest is Dr. Debbie Saunders. She's been a conservation ecologist for more than 25 years, and she's founder, CEO, and chief remote pilot at Wildlife Drones, based in Australia. Dr. Saunders, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to hear from you. We've been keeping in touch during your round the US trip. You're back in Australia after 5 weeks, 3 states, multiple conferences, in person demonstrations. How are you still standing? How are you feeling after that long trip?
Oh, look, I'm super excited. We made some amazing connections all over the country, and it did take a bit to recover, but we're back on the ground and running now. But it's been really a really amazing trip, and the connections that we made were fantastic.
So, Dr. Saunders, while you were here, you launched a new product, a biodiversity monitoring tool. How does that differ from your work in Australia? How is that going to complement your work in Australia and maybe farther away from down under?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biodiversity monitoring tool is a portal that corporates and their supply chain can use to be able to understand and monitor biodiversity and be able to disclose that in relation to the global biodiversity framework that was signed off on last year by countries all around the world. So for that product, much like wildlife drones as well, it's global from the beginning. So although we are based in Australia, we do have clients in many other parts of the world who are using our technologies as well. And it really complements it in that the wildlife drones tracking technology is for people who want to track the movements of individual animals for specific management purposes or research purposes,
Mhm.
whereas the biodiversity tool is a much broader context in that it's for any corporate that really needs to do financial disclosures around nature and their supply chain who want to be nature positive. And so really helping those people get a leg up and be able to create positive change for biodiversity at a global scale in a general sense. And then the wildlife drones technology is for tracking animal movements more specifically.
So, what exactly does this tool look like, and can you put it onto a drone?
So no, the biodiversity tool is just a portal online. But what we're doing is we're aggregating biodiversity data from a whole raft of different sensors that are used all around the world. And so it might be acoustic monitors, camera traps, environmental DNA, drone data, any combination of that will shed light on what biodiversity resources are at a particular site to help people identify what it is that they have, what is their interface with nature, and
Mhm.
then what are the best tools to be able to monitor that and track change over time. So it's all about making the most of data that is in existence, but also
Mhm.
helping our clients understand what sensors and technologies they might like to incorporate into their everyday business to be able to track change and get that data included as well.
So, it's almost like a giant database.
Exactly. It's a giant database of data from a whole raft of different sources that currently exist in many, many different places, from migratory animal movements, right through to plant surveys on the ground, bringing that all together so that people can leverage that with the crisis that we have around
Mhm.
biodiversity right now really needs action to be taken right now. And so we need to leverage the data that already exists. And there's billions upon billions of data points out there that aren't being used to the maximum benefit. So that's what we'd like to change.
I could definitely see that. Now, as the head of wildlife drones, you're using drones with this radio telemetry, software and products. What is radio telemetry? I know you spoke about it a lot at the conferences that you were at. You had booths all about it. But for many people who don't understand what radio telemetry is, including myself, can you go into how that helps find animals?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, some just the reason why people want to track animals. So radio
Hmm.
telemetry is all about tracking animal movements, and
Hmm.
the reasons people tend to want to track animals is to understand their movements, so we can either better protect them in terms of endangered species, or better control them in terms of invasive species. So the people who are doing this like every day as part of their business are often within government, so within the National Parks and Wildlife, the Fish and Wildlife Departments,
Hmm.
Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, these types of government departments all undertake tracking of animal movements. How people tend to do the tracking is that they have to attach a tag to particular animals that they're trying to understand, and then they track their movements. There are many different types of tags out there. So there's satellite tags, which obviously just beam the data up to satellites, which is amazing.
Hmm.
But majority of the world's wildlife are too small or cannot have that type of tag attached for one
Mm,
reason or another. And so that means that the majority of the world's species, we have very little knowledge of their movements. But with
absolutely.
radio tags, they are just a very simple tag, and they emit a signal at a particular frequency. And
Hmm.
our sensor that we've developed, a radio telemetry sensor, it actually is listening for those signals and then doing direction finding and locating where those animals are without needing to go close. So, without disturbing their behavior, we can find where they are. So, people on the ground can actually go and find that animal if they need to for control purposes, or to protect them and understand them, or to do observations, or maybe even change the tag because they need to renew the tag because the battery's getting low. So that tends to be the main reasons why people need to track. And it's becoming more important over time as everything in our world is shifting, as the climate is changing, animal movements are changing, the flowering cycles of trees in which they rely on are
Hmm.
changing, everything is shifting. And so if we actually want to be really smart about the
Hmm.
management and where to put the money into on the ground, that we need to better understand the movements.
And that's where drones come in, Dr. Saunders, because it is a labor intensive task to say, let's have a team of people walk through, the mountainous jungles or go through the brush with a machete or something to try and figure out how to find these animals, how to tag them. Putting a drone up makes this much more efficient process. It Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only is the drone can maneuver across those landscapes, obviously, much
Mhm.
more easily than you can often do on the ground, whether
Mhm.
it be a mountainous landscape, which is just really, really hard to be able to scale the mountains sometimes, and be able to search for signals like over a ridge or up a gully, something like that. The drone is super maneuverable, and so you can access those places more easily. But importantly, one of the things that the drone does is it provides a high point wherever the people are on the ground. And so when people are tracking by hand, they're walking around with their arm up in the air, listening for the beep, beep, which is what we also listen for from the
Oh
drone.
my goodness.
But actually finding where that is, they're always trying to get to a high point so
Mhm.
that they can maximize the chances of picking up that signal. But with the drone, they can create a high point wherever they are, and so
Mhm.
you'll maximize the chances of that. And if you can't access a valley, you can fly there. And if you're in a wetland, for example, it's really flat, and so getting a high point is impossible on the ground generally. And so being able to launch a drone and fly even across the most inhospitable wetland is a
Mhm.
game changer for a lot of people. So it just makes a lot of sense to take to the air, to be able to do this type of work. But the other side of it as well is that on the ground, they're tracking one animal at a time. And then they have to switch to another frequency, and then they have to track the other. And what happens is they'll track one, and then they'll go over here, and then they'll go over there and realize that the other one was actually back next to the first one.
Oh
And so
no.
they've just wasted an immense amount of time, or they've been listening and listening and listening and unable to find it for days, weeks on end, and wasting a lot of people's time. And so, with our system, we can track up to 40 animals simultaneously. And so, then no matter where they take the drone, they can listen for all of the tags at the
Mm.
same time. So, you're never going to be duplicating that effort. If it's in that area, you will detect it. If it's not there, you know that you can move to another area.
So how can you tell that one animal is different than another when you say 40 animals or creatures
Yeah.
simultaneously? How does that? Does that
They
make
all
sense?
have unique frequencies. So each tag has a unique frequency, and we're
Oh,
listening for all of those frequencies. And as soon as the drone is launched, like it's tracking all of the time that it's in the air, and you
wow.
see the real time radio signal information coming back to the base station in real time. So as soon as it picks up a signal, you see a spike on the chart, and a dot lights up green on
Wow.
the map and goes, "Yep, you've got that one." And so it's very, very instant. There's like 6 second delay kind of thing. It's like real time information while you're in the field. And so sometimes these tags also change the rate at which they send the signals if the
Mhm.
something has happened to the animal. So if they
Oh,
die or they're injured and they're not moving, the signals will change and we can read that signal. And so if they're out tracking
wow.
and they pick up that signal, they're immediately notified that there is something wrong with this animal and they need to go and find it on the ground, and they have that real time information to be able
Wow.
to do that really quickly to determine what has actually happened for that animal.
You had a number of in-person demonstrations while you were here in the US. One of them I saw included it was in an area that where it was these tags or buoys were considered alligators in the water.
Mm.
And so you were able to pretend that there were alligators using these buoys, attach the trackers to the alligators, and show the people watching what this tracking technology is all about. What kind of feedback did you get from people who were watching this maybe for the first time? Maybe they'd seen it before, but they'd seen it with different eyes in your perspective.
Yeah, well, this was actually the first time that we had tracked alligator tags, and this was at the Fort Worth Nature Center in
Mhm.
Texas. It was fantastic to be able to have actually a controlled setting where you can clearly explore what are the capabilities. So we weren't sure how deep the tags could be in terms of picking up the signal, but the people who do the alligator research, they said that well, often the alligators are like 5 foot underwater, and when they're
Mhm.
deep underwater, they can't pick up the signals with the handheld receiver.
Mm.
This is one of those wetland contexts where it's very difficult to get up high in order to track animals in a wetland. They
Mhm.
also have alligator nests at this site as well. So we actually went out and buried a tag in a known alligator nest as if it was in the nest. And then we also had these tags attached to buoys. And one tag was 1 foot deep. One tag was 3 foot, and another one was 5 foot deep. And then we just flew the drone around the wet. I actually didn't know where they were, and the pilot didn't know where they were. They just flew
Mhm.
the drone around, and we were able to pinpoint exactly where all of those tags were, including the one that was 5 foot under. And so it was super exciting to see that for the first time and just see it work so beautifully. So yeah, I really look forward to working more on those even large species that are really challenging because they're often underwater.
So that was your first time seeing how it would work with alligators.
Yeah, yeah, it was the first time for in the world actually that anyone had done that. So yeah, it was really cool.
Wow, that's just absolutely incredible. You were in Kentucky during part of this mission as well. You even had time to take in the beauty of Kentucky in between all of these meetings. I don't know how, but you managed to find a dog and help a
Yes.
stranded dog in the middle of, demonstrating how the wildlife drones operates and everything. Obviously, you have a love for creatures that goes beyond your job description. Why are creatures so important to you, and have you had that love since a young age? What's your background behind that?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, my family has always been a camping family.
Hmm.
And so we would often go out and pitch our tent in nature. And I spent a lot of my childhood just exploring natural areas. And I've just loved the uniqueness of all the different creatures that make up an ecosystem.
Hmm.
It started off with koalas, when I was young, and like they're an amazing creature, right? They're unique to hear. It wasn't that they were cute and cuddly. It was like the fact that they had this pouch that was backwards and they've got these weird toes and all these things that made them perfect at what they need to do in the
Oh,
ecosystem. So that was
that's
sort of one of the
beautiful.
things that highlighted like just the uniqueness that's possible in nature. But I'm fascinated by by not just the animals, but the ecosystems in which they exist and the intricacies. For example, even with butterflies, where they lay their eggs and they have their cocoons, and there's ants that come and actually protect those from predation by birds. And they're really nasty ants for us, but they're perfect to protect the butterflies. And they only exist on a particular type of plant. And so
Wow.
when you see this like entire little micro ecosystems, and they all are dependent on each other, I just find it fascinating. And then, like, we find a stranded dog in the middle of a national park, and it's like it's not good for the wildlife to have that dog roaming around, and that poor dog was starving. And so, it
Oh.
actually took quite some time to coerce it to get it into the car and actually find somewhere we could take it to, so that it could be looked after and adopted. And so,
Oh, God
it
bless you.
it
Wow.
was, I know, it was just like they were well, the adoption center was amazing. And they took her in, and they were overloaded. They had so many animals. It was so
Oh.
sad to see, but they really, really cared for those animals. And I was really grateful, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I'm from Australia, so I can't, like, if I lived here, I could just take the dog home. Like, she was a
Aw.
beautiful dog, but I couldn't. So I needed to find her a home, and I'm really grateful to the shelter that actually took her in for us. So yeah,
Wow, what an incredible story. An unexpected day of
yeah.
what that was experienced like. Now you also have received an award from Women in Drones. You actually received that award while you were here in the U.S. You weren't able to go and get it in Washington D.C. But what did that mean to you for being recognized internationally for the work that you're doing in Australia and beyond?
Yeah, look, I was so stoked to be included in the Hall of Fame there for my work in terms of innovation in the drone space. It was
Mhm.
incredibly special for me. And what I discovered was actually there was a whole cohort of women from Australia that were also in that awards, that were recognized for those awards. And I
Oh.
wished so badly that I could have been there, but I literally was in California when that event was on in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
Excitingly, though, I'm actually going to get my hands on the award itself tonight. I'm going to an event here
Oh.
in Australia that my colleague picked up the award for me in the States, and she's bringing it along tonight. So I'll finally, have that award that I can put on my shelf from
Oh,
today.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
What does it mean? I've been talking about this with other women in the drone industry. There's women are still a bit of a minority in the drone industry, at least here in the U.S. and abroad as well, from
Yeah.
what I've seen.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean to be a leader in this industry for you?
Look, to me, it's really special, and especially like you say, at the international level, to be recognised for the innovation that we're doing. In the same week, I also won two business awards here in Australia. It was a big week, and I wasn't able to go to any of them, so it was a bit frustrating. But I won a Businesswoman of the Year for our state, as well as the Innovator of the Year for our state at the same time. And I think, like, this culmination of getting recognition in the United States and globally,
Mhm.
together with having a local award in relation to a business for business sake. We often win conservation awards and that type of thing, but to be given broader recognition, like in the aviation industry and in the
Mhm.
business industry, like as a business in itself, for me was a really special culmination, like a really special time to get that recognition. And everything that I do is really has a global focus. And so even
Mhm.
though we're in Australia, we've always been working with clients in other places like Vietnam and South America, and we're moving up into Canada as well. And we always get inquiries from Asia and Africa, Europe. Like, it's just global,
Mhm.
the need for these technologies. So we might be physically distant, but these days I find that that doesn't stop you from being successful at a global scale.
One of the things that I love you said recently is, you've been commercializing conservation with wildlife drones. In one post, you mentioned if you are addressing a real problem and creating value, you often get to advance conservation and technology much more rapidly and at a much larger scale if you commercialize it than if you rely on grants and philanthropic funds alone. Tell me about why you said that and why wildlife drones is such a great mission for you beyond just saying, "Can I have some money?"
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, yeah, in the field of conservation, we're used to living on handouts and grants and for it to be non-profit or what have you. And I guess when we were thinking about wildlife drones at the start, we were tossing up the idea between, do we set up a non-profit organization or do we set it up as a commercial enterprise? And to be honest, the non-profit setup seemed really complicated. We had to have a committee of people, everyone had to
Mhm.
agree, and I didn't even know if this was actually going to become a reality. I was just exploring an idea and how could I get this technology out to people, and it just seemed simpler to go down the commercialization path than to try and there was just this immense amount of paperwork to set up a nonprofit organization. But what I also, I guess I've had to adapt to over time is that asking for money for a product means that you can support a team to advance the technology more quickly. When you are reliant on like a handout or a grant or working for free, which I mean, I worked for free for a couple of years before we actually even, started getting paid for anything. Then, so you can do the hard yards, but there comes a point where everyone has to pay their bills and
Mhm.
everyone has to, live their lives. And so if I can actually generate income to get really great minds together to achieve something that's not previously been possible, and that adds value for people, then that it's amazing because then you can sustain yourself and actually be able to even create more good things at greater scales. And I do feel that since I've been an entrepreneur and having the business,
Mhm.
I've been able to help conservation projects much, much bigger than anything I've ever done, working in government, working in the private sector, in the research institutions. They've all been important part of my journey, but
Mhm.
I'd been very focused on, endangered species and even one species for many, many years.
Mhm.
And yet you can't necessarily influence everything that changes the outcome of that.
Mhm.
So, for example, the swift parrot, which is a species that I have worked on for many, many years. It's critically endangered, it's a migratory bird, and it was actually the inspiration for developing wildlife drones because we wanted to track them.
And it's
That's
based in Australia, that swift parrot, correct?
Yeah, it's entirely in Australia. It
Mhm.
has some breeding grounds in Tasmania and it migrates up through the wintering grounds. And it is likely to go extinct before my kids finish school. So
Mm.
despite working on them for 20 years or more, and doing everything I can to try and protect, we now know a lot about this species. We know what it needs, we know what it need to do, but our government continues to log the forests on which they rely. And it includes old growth forests, which you would not imagine that we would continue to be harvesting this day and age here in Australia. But we are, and this species is being wiped out as a result. And so it's quite disheartening, that everything I've done, and we know a lot, we know what we need to do, and yet I still haven't been able to make that change happen. But now, with the business, I am working, well, not me personally, but I'm enabling people who are working on a
Mhm.
whole raft of different species, reptiles, mammals, birds, all over the world, to be able to improve what they're doing to get better outcomes. And a lot of them are doing amazing stuff, reintroducing
Mm.
animals to the wild and actually finding out they've been hugely successful. And so being able to amplify what was originally my problem to
Mhm.
be able to help other people has been fantastic. And now I
Wow.
feel with our biodiversity portal as well, with the data aggregation and helping even more people globally, I just it's really great. Like you couldn't ask for something more as a conservation ecologist to amplify your impact.
I've covered the military before and they talk about force multipliers. It sounds like you alone are a force multiplier in the wildlife conservation world for the way that you talk about, and to think that, your work with this swift parrot has translated into helping so many other species around the world. That swift parrot has a reason in your life. That all those other animals are thanking you and probably thanking the swift parrot for all the work that you're doing. You have such interesting use cases. You mentioned them on the wildlife drones website. One of them is about the pandolin in Vietnam. You mentioned Vietnam a few moments ago. It was fun to see a video where you're like on the ground in the jungle in
Yeah.
Vietnam. And I actually had to look up what a pandolin is. It's one of the most trafficked mammals in the world, which which I didn't
Yes.
know either. Kind of looks like an armadillo, but what a cute face. I did not expect such a cute face on this little creature. It's got kind of a long anteater-ish nose, maybe a medium-sized nose, but it kind of looks like between like an anteater and an armadillo, I would say, if someone needs to get a description of what they look like. But apparently they're very hard to track, and your drones are helping to make that happen. Are there any other use cases that you're proud of? And everyone loves animals. So anything specific that you can talk to?
Oh, look, there's so many that are amazing. I think there's some that are coming up as well that I think I'm really excited about, and it's interesting the differences in different places. So in Vietnam, it is all about endangered species, saving
Hmm.
them from poaching, looking at their survival, making sure that they're going okay. In the US, there's a lot of focus on disease prevention and
Mm.
invasive species control. So you're looking at Burmese pythons down in the Everglades, you're looking at giant hornets up in Washington state, and you're looking at bats, these tiny little bats that are prone to white nose syndrome, and trying to understand these bats and why the populations are plummeting, which has
Hmm.
massive implications for food security in terms of pest control and eating insects and things like that. So I find it hard to pick, particular ones because every project that our clients are working on, has a really important impact in that particular area. And there's so many species around the world that really need to be. We need greater understanding in order to manage them better. That
Mm.
it's pretty hard, but I have had the fortune of going out on certain projects, and when I get to actually physically go out, I mean, it's always amazing. Certainly Vietnam was definitely a highlight.
I can imagine.
I got to go to New Zealand and track kakapo, which is like this huge fat flightless parrot
Oh,
that
okay.
yeah, yeah,
I didn't think parrots were flightless. That's a new one
yeah,
for
well,
me.
this one is.
Oh,
You'll have to
oh,
look it up. They're totally amazing birds, very, very on the brink of extinction. There's less than 200 in the world, and we were
oh
tracking
my.
up to 40 at the
200
same time.
period. Wow.
Yep.
Oh,
Total,
that's
total.
horrible.
So, yeah, but they're working to recover them, and they know a lot about them now because they've been able to track them and do lots of research on the breeding and on the habitat use, etc. They also have disease issues as well, so it's really
Mm.
important to track them and understand when they're getting sick and why. Um, and then, yeah, in the US, as I mentioned, the bats are really key. But we do have partners as well in the US, so Island Conservation. They're a non-profit organization, and they work across the Pacific Islands doing really amazing work with invasive species control so that we can reintroduce the native species to these islands, which are incredibly unique, including the Galapagos Islands, which is the most recent deployment of our technology. So,
Oh, wow.
as a conservation ecologist, you can't get more unique and more impactful than helping, one of the greatest hotspots in the world, and helping the people on the ground actually make sure the invasive species control is effective, but also helping with the reintroduction of the native species.
Absolutely amazing. You mentioned you have a couple new projects coming up with new creatures. It may sounds like you may not be able to reveal much, but can you give any hints? At least give us some kind of genus or type of creature that you might be working with.
Well, I mean, there's always more in the pipeline. And in Australia here, we also do some thermal imaging work. So we do a lot of surveys, which just
Mhm.
started off typically with koalas. But with the advancing of the sensor technologies and our pilot skills, we are now able to identify to species level in real time creatures as tiny as the palm of your hand.
Oh,
And like, for example, a feather tail glider. So it's a tiny, tiny little possum that glides that's the size of your hand, or less than the palm, just the size of the palm of your hand, and pygmy possums and all sorts of other glider species, which are really rare and are also struggling to survive. And
oh.
now we're actually setting the new standard in terms of how you survey for those things and how you can actually optimize your management of those forests so that these species aren't being as impacted as they currently are.
Wow, I'm sure you have a lot of plans for the future for wildlife drones, especially coming off of the your big U.S. trip. What is your hope for the drone industry in the next 5 to 10 years, and what do you want to see happen? What do you hope to see in that time frame?
Yeah, look, I really would like to see the long range, the long range platforms, the vertical takeoff and land platforms,
Mhm.
become more I guess, drop in price, so it becomes more accessible, but also have those automated systems. Like there's a lot of technology out there already, which is amazing. It's usually you typically used in military and security applications, where you
Hmm.
have the launching and landing automated. So you have these drones that can go in and out and recharge and collect data like all the time. And I feel
Hmm.
like that is the future. And the technology is already there, but it's still prohibitively expensive for the conservation industry. So I'm really looking forward to that. Just like with the quadcopters, they're now just a very common thing that anybody can use. I feel like going and having longer range applications will be the next game changer for us. So being able to integrate the same technology that we've built into one of these platforms so it can stay up in the air for much longer, collect more data more often over a bigger area would be amazing. So that's something that we're working towards. Everything we do is a little incremental step towards that. But we also need the regulations to keep up. And so being able to do that safely in a way that is
Hmm.
beyond visual line of sight, where you have the right setup, I think is what also needs to happen as well as the technology advancing.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you and seeing your posts all about your progress through wildlife drones. If anyone wants to find out more, how can they find out more about wildlife drones?
Yeah, if you just search up wildlife drones in Google, you'll find our webpage, and we have a contact form there. And that sends an email directly to me or to my colleague who's also based in the US, and then we'll follow up with you. We always love to hear about people as they're exploring ideas. A lot of our
Hmm.
clients have to apply for grant applications or what have you, and so if you just have an idea or an inspiration about the sorts of things that you would like to do, you're welcome to just book a meeting, and we're happy to throw around some ideas with you and see what might be possible.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know it's taken a while for us to get on the same page about meeting together. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights on PropsClear.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
If you have topics or suggestions for future episodes, contact me, angelswings.jillian@gmail.com. That's ANGELSWINGS.JILLIAN @gmail.com. I'll see you later.